3 million years ago, back when the first groups of early humans began to appear on Earth, our protagonist was one of them. He seemed like any other Australopithecus at first glance, but there was something different about him, something that set him apart. Except having unusual obsession with hunting, MC thought he was just like everyone else, but soon he realized something was wrong about him. While others around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he didn't. No matter what happened, he simply wouldn't die. Time passed, eons came and went, but he stayed the same. Well, not exactly the same. While the years left no mark on him, his body kept changing, growing larger, stronger, and more powerful. In this endless passage of time, the only things that kept him going were hunting, fighting, and battling anything or anyone that seemed worth his time. As someone cursed with eternal life and unbearable loneliness, those were the only things that gave him any joy. For nearly 3 million years, he lived this way, his body evolving day by day, becoming stronger and stronger. Eventually, he reached a point where his strength was unmatched, so much so that others began calling him the god of Earth, Mu. His power grew to such an extent that he defeated every other god in existence, claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. But after that, things started to change. With no one left who could challenge him, his once thrilling days of combat and excitement turned into an endless stretch of boredom. To show just how fed up he was with his boring daily routine, Mu raised his foot and slammed it down on the ground beneath him. The entire dwelling of the gods, which looked like a small planet, shook violently from the impact. But that wasn't even the worst part. The whole divine realm started trembling like crazy, leaving every god, angel, and even the evils within it absolutely terrified. Of course, this wasn't the first time God Mu pulled a stunt like this, and there were some gods who simply couldn't take being shaken up every single day. One of them was Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu, completely bored, acted like he didn't care about the chaos he was causing. His mind was consumed with the same thought that had plagued him for centuries. He had defeated every single worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and now it had been over 1,000 years since he'd faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, Mu muttered to himself, being too strong is a problem too. As the words left his mouth, something clicked in his mind. After 1,000 years of mindless frustration, he suddenly felt like a genius. If his strength was the problem, then the solution was simple. He needed to find a way to weaken himself. In his mind, it was obvious. If he could get a weak body like the Earthlings, he'd have hundreds of opponents to fight. Suddenly, Mu stood up from his seat and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him, then descended to the ground with a thunderous landing. The dragon's height was at least 5 times bigger than God Mu's throne, and from the way it stood, it didn't seem too thrilled about being summoned. But that was just the way the dragon looked. Those glowing eyes belonged to the top god's assistant, and Dragonlim was his name. Suddenly his demeanor changed and let out a deep growl and asked why he had been called. To his surprise, God Mu simply started walking away and casually told Dragonling to take care of things while he was gone. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Mu expected. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast the spell Binding of the Absolute, and in a bold move shackled God Mu in an attempt to stop him. But the moment Mu turned his head and gave him a side glance filled with anger, the dragon's entire demeanor shifted again. His fierce and wild attitude melted away, and he suddenly looked scared and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon tried to explain himself, saying he didn't mean to offend his lord, but that Mu should have at least given an explanation, especially since there was a gods meeting coming up soon. Mu, however, didn't give 2 flying fucks about the gods meeting. Without saying another word, he started walking again, dragging the dragon along with the chains like they were nothing. Seeing his first plan fail, Mu's assistant quickly switched tactics and started playing the victim. He whined, saying that if Mu didn't show up for the meeting, he'd be the one stuck dealing with the other gods' endless complaints about Mu's actions. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it was nothing. He turned to the dragon and yelled, saying he wouldn't go anywhere if instead of that, the dragon agreed to fight him right now. That was all it took to completely change the assistant's attitude. Realizing that taking blame from the other gods was far better than being torn apart by God Mu, the dragon immediately wished him a safe and short trip. Mu smirked and walked toward what looked like a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched the surface of the mini-Earth. As he did, he began to wonder whose body he should choose to inhabit on Earth. To make the decision easier, he started listening in on the messages Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most of them were trivial and boring, but then one particular message caught his attention. It was a message that was questioning his very existence. At first, the message annoyed God Mu. However, it didn't take long for him to realize something. This person was the perfect choice for him to start his journey on Earth again. For the first time in 1,000 years, Mu felt genuinely excited. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. But while Mu couldn't have been happier, his assistant looked far less enthusiastic about the whole thing. For a brief moment, Mu thought about whether he should give some sort of explanation before leaving. But, true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. Much to the dragon's surprise, he simply said goodbye, entrusted the place to him, and told him to take care of anyone who might show up in his absence. The dragon felt a mix of worry and frustration when he realized what was happening. God Mu was only sending his soul to Earth while leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind him of the risks. If something happens to Mu's body while he's gone, his separated soul would also die on Earth. But Mu had already made up his mind. The idea that no one in the divine realm would dare even think about harming him gave him complete confidence that his body would be perfectly safe while he was away. Despite the dragon's attempts to stop him, though only through words, Mu brushed off his assistant's concerns and did what he wanted, just like always. Without further explanation, the scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore, but someone entirely different. Someone who had just defeated the demon lord after a grueling battle. The feeling of victory was overwhelming, and the person couldn't have been happier. But it wasn't real life. It was just the final scene of a video game that a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old loser named Lee Ho. Lee Ho was painfully jealous of the heroes in every video game he played, those lucky protagonists who always managed to gather massive harems of cute girls during their ridiculous adventures. And as Lee Ho stared at the game credits rolling on his screen, he couldn't help but sigh, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Lee suddenly let go of his phone, and it slipped from his hand, falling as if from a great height. In mere seconds, the phone hit the ground with a loud crash, shattering into pieces. It was then clear why Lee Ho was standing on the edge of a 3-story building, ready to end his life. With nothing left to live for, his body trembling and covered in injuries, he whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel and unfair world before jumping. As he fell, the wind whipping past him, Lee screamed with tear-filled eyes from the depths of his despair. "If there's a god out there," he shouted, "now's your chance to prove it. Send me to another world." Before he could even finish his plea, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splattered everywhere, and his head smashed directly into the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then, something strange happened. Lee's hands twitched, shaking uncontrollably. His chest heaved, and he suddenly started breathing heavily, like someone who had just been pulled from drowning. Unbeknownst to Lee, God Mu's soul had possessed his body in the blink of an eye right before he hit the ground. Now, Mu was forced to endure the unbearable pain of Lee's broken and battered body, completely unaware of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Lee's soul had been transported to the divine realm. He stood there, utterly shocked, his jaw practically on the floor. What shocked him wasn't just that he was in some otherworldly place, but that he was standing face to face with a towering dragon, one that definitely didn't look happy to see him. But the shock was mutual. The dragon, too, was stunned. He hadn't expected to see a human so soon in the divine realm, same as Lee that definitely hadn't expected the first thing he'd see after dying to be a massive, angry dragon glaring right at him. Let's take a moment to rewind and see what really happened just 10 seconds before this entire incident unfolded. God Mu was standing there with that signature smirk on his face, lightly touching the surface of the mini-Earth in front of him. As I mentioned earlier, he wasn't the least bit worried about leaving his defenseless body behind. He had full confidence. Too much confidence, honestly. The dragonling tried to warn him, urging him to think this through. But Mu, reckless as ever, he brushed off the warnings like they were nothing. Without a second thought, he sent his soul hurtling towards Earth, swapping places with Lee Ho's soul. The very next moment, the unexpected happened. As soon as Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he realized he was in a dire life-or-death situation. No time to adjust, no warning. He was in mid-air, plummeting toward the ground at lightning speed. Less than a second. That's all the time he had to process the danger he was in. And then it happened. Lee's body hit the ground with such an incredible force that it was almost impossible to believe. The impact wasn't just devastating, it was catastrophic. Bones shattered into pieces. The body was flung backward like a rag doll before finally coming to a rest. The pain? It was beyond anything Mu had ever experienced in his immortal life. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What really hit him was the sheer confusion. Why? Why did this happen the moment he set foot, soul, on Earth? How did he end up in such a mess, and so quickly? None of it made any sense. His hands trembled uncontrollably at first, the shock coursing through his borrowed body. But then suddenly, everything went still. His hands stopped shaking. The realization dawned on him in that chilling, silent moment. He was dying. No chance to change his fate, no time to fix what was broken. And just like that, his lifeless body collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving ground. The area was eerily quiet, with no one around to witness the fall of what was once a proud and mighty god. No one to help, no one to even notice. But this wasn't the end for God Mu. Not yet. As you know, some human muscles move without conscious control. These are called involuntary muscles, like the heart and internal organs. For Mu, who had spent 3 million years training his body, he had reached the absolute peak of understanding the human form. This allowed him to consciously control every single part of his body, including his vessels and even his internal organs. Nothing was off limits for him. That was exactly how, just a few seconds after dying, his heart started beating again. The pain was excruciating, even for someone like Mu. But by forcing his blood to flow through his vessels and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly but surely, Mu began to rise to his feet as if nothing had happened, even though his entire body was still screaming in pain. But instead of being angry about this chaotic situation, Mu found himself oddly happy. Beaten up, covered in blood. It had been so long since he felt anything like this. This feeling convinced him that he'd made the right choice to come here. His next move was to sift through Li Ho's memories to figure out what kind of life this guy had been leading. It didn't take long for him to learn everything about Li. With that knowledge, Mu decided to head back to Li's home, his new base, to figure out his next steps. Surprisingly, Mu found it difficult to walk with Li's weak and injured legs, so, like an ape, he used his hands to support himself, both to move faster and to take some of the pressure off his legs. Not long after, he finally reached Li's house, though the first thing he noticed was a cat had left a poop right in front of the window. As soon as he entered the small, basement-like house, Mu sat down on the creaky bed and started reflecting on what he had learned about Li's life so far. According to Li's memories, he only had one male relative, and that person lived far away from here. It didn't take long for Mu to realize that the guy he had chosen not only lived alone, but was also poor and utterly miserable. His only occupation seemed to be attending some place called school. What amused Mu the most, though, was the memory of someone at school who seemed to have made it their life's mission to bully Li. Not only did this person constantly pick fights with him, but they also went out of their way to make Li's life a living hell. This, to Mu, was exactly the kind of starting point he had hoped for. It was messy, chaotic, and full of potential for challenges. He couldn't be happier about it. Feeling a surge of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air to celebrate, but the moment he did, a sharp and unexpected pain shot through his right arm. It felt as if the muscles in his arm had torn apart. Something was definitely wrong. Mu figured the pain in his arm was probably because of how he had overused his hand muscles while awkwardly crawling back home. It became pretty obvious that this body hadn't seen much action. The first thing Mu noticed was that Li had almost never used his arm muscles for anything strenuous, so even the simplest effort left them sore. Still, instead of feeling frustrated or angry about being stuck in such a weak body, Mu smirked. In fact, he was genuinely happy to feel pain like this, after thousands of years of living without it. The next day, the police discovered the bloodstains and shattered glasses at the scene where Li Ho's body had crashed to the ground. They quickly roped off the area, forbidding anyone from entering as they launched their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu casually returned to the crash scene, not to check on the investigation though. The real reason he was there was because that 3-story building near the scene was none other than Li's school, and Mu had decided to keep up with Li's daily routine. He strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he found Li's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he slid the rail door open with way too much force. The door rebounded and slammed back into him, smacking him squarely and leaving Mu momentarily stunned. His triumphant moment was completely ruined. Muttering to himself, he slowly stepped into the classroom, drawing the attention of one of Li's classmates. The boy was immediately annoyed by the noise Li made as he entered the classroom. He shot him an irritated glare and called him "Idiot Li Ho," telling him to keep it down. Hearing this, Mu completely forgot about the pain in his face and began walking toward the boy. Mu stopped right in front of him, standing uncomfortably close, which left the boy momentarily shocked, but it wasn't Li's weak and frail appearance that surprised him. It was the unsettling, creepy smile on Mu's face. In that instant, Mu recognized this boy as the bully from Li's memories, the one who always made his life miserable. The bully, completely unaware that Li Ho was no longer the same person, scoffed and mocked him. "What's wrong with you, huh? Did you leave your glasses at home? Or are you just too blind and stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could even respond, the boy suddenly swung his fist and punched him square in the face, as if to reassert his dominance over Li. The punch landed hard, and blood started dripping from Mu's nose and mouth, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bully smirked, clearly proud of himself, and mocked him again. "What happened to your glasses? Did you sell them for cash or something? Or did you just lose them like the idiot you are?" Even with the blood running down his face, Mu didn't flinch. He stood there calmly, unfazed by the punch. When it came to fighting, Mu had his own unshakable rules. To him, a proper and honorable fight could only begin when all parties involved had willingly shown their intent to fight. And right now, Mu was waiting for the right moment to respond. As someone always ready to face any opponent, whether it's a god, a beast, or a human, Mu's only concern was confirming his opponent's intent to fight. And the way Mu chose to confirm that intent was simple. He would stand still and take the opponent's first strike. That's exactly what happened here. After taking the punch, the familiar excitement and satisfied smile spread across Mu's face. Without any hesitation, Mu sprang into action, interrupting the bully mid-sentence with a sudden punch aimed directly at him. The boy, completely caught off guard, took the punch squarely, just as Mu had moments ago. But as Mu pulled his hand back, a sharp, unbearable pain shot through his arm. His muscles felt like they were tearing apart again, a brutal reminder that this wasn't his indestructible godly body, but a fragile, weak human one. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the teacher, who stormed over, shouting angrily and demanding that they stop fighting immediately. But by now, the noise had also drawn the interest of the entire class. Heads turned, curious and intrigued by the sight of a fight breaking out in the middle of the room. The bully, feeling humiliated and furious after being punched by a nerd for the first time in his life, couldn't contain his anger any longer. Ignoring the teacher's yelling and the watching crowd, he charged straight at Mu, ready to unleash his fury. Mu immediately tried to defend himself and managed to block most of the attacks. Well, kind of. While defending, he couldn't help but think that he would have ended this fight a long time ago if his new body could actually keep up with him. For a brief moment, he considered using some of his godly powers. But to his shock, they didn't work. That moment of disbelief distracted him, and before he knew it, he took another punch to the face. At least this one wasn't as hard as the last one. The bully wasn't about to back off from the person he believed was Lee, not until he made him regret throwing that first punch. On the other hand, Mu found himself in a pretty bad spot. He couldn't muster the strength to fight back with this weak body. No punches, no kicks, and without his godly powers, he was left with only one option. In a sudden move, he lowered his head, aiming at a specific spot, and took the incoming punch directly on his skull. The bones of his skull were the only part of this body that he could count on. Just as he expected, the bully's fist slammed into his head, and the impact immediately made the guy break the bones in his fingers. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a baby, and in that moment Mu couldn't help but feel like an absolute genius. To put an end to this ridiculous fight, Mu decided to take advantage of the bully's distraction before he could recover. This time, he was the one who rushed forward, grabbing the bully's hand in a sudden move. Without wasting a second, he used his head to strike, aiming directly at the guy's stomach or maybe even his balls, knowing most guys' weak spots are right there. The bully was caught completely off guard, unable to handle yet another wave of unbearable pain at the same time. But Mu wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure this guy would never forget this day for the rest of his life. With another swift move, Mu raised his head and slammed it into the bully's jaw. This time, the pain was too much for the bully to handle. His eyes rolled back and he dropped to his knees in front of Mu like a defeated loser before finally passing out. All of this happened while everyone else stood there in shock, recording the entire fight. Watching the weakest guy in school take down one of the school's biggest bullies wasn't something anyone could believe so easily. But for Mu, things were different. He had just fought someone for the first time in thousands of years, using every bit of strength he could muster. The feeling was incredible, but now wasn't the time to celebrate. As his excitement faded, the pain from all the hits he'd taken came rushing in all at once. He could taste the sticky, metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. At first, it didn't seem like something even God Mu could handle so easily, but it only took a moment for him to realize something surprising. He was more than okay with it. After such a long, hard time, it actually felt satisfying to experience the pain of a good fight again. A few moments later, when Mu's excitement finally settled, he stared at the unconscious boy's body like he wasn't done with him yet. Mu sat down next to him, and for some reason, probably because the boy gave him such a tough fight, he thanked him. Then, in a completely unexpected move, Mu leaned in, lowered his head, opened his mouth wide, and bit the boy's ear, making blood splatter everywhere. But Mu didn't just bite the ear. He actually tore off a small piece of it and spat it onto the ground right in front of all his classmates. Horror filled the air. None of the students could believe what Mu had just done. It was like watching a crazy person. Mu, however, didn't care at all about what anyone thought. He calmly wiped the blood off his face, still glaring at the boy's body, who, even after losing part of his ear, didn't so much as twitch. This wild act of biting off the bully's ear was actually Mu's way of leaving a mark on his opponent, someone who had given him a fight that he truly enjoyed. It was his twisted way of showing gratitude, while also marking them as someone worthy of his attention. These opponents were later referred to as Mu's playthings. However, it was clear, Only strong opponents who gave him exciting battles could earn a spot on this list. Back then, being called one of Mu's playthings was almost like a badge of honor, a symbol of strength. Ironically, in a way, it was similar to how humans in some eras would mark animals to show they had been neutered, except Mu's mark wasn't about humiliation, but recognition. Soon enough, the story of the second-year bully who got beaten by the weakest guy in school spread faster than lightning. The most shocking part for everyone wasn't just that the bully got beaten, it was that he basically got neutered. The boy's condition was so bad that they had no choice but to call emergency medical services to come and take care of him. Like all the other curious students, Mu was also watching as they transferred Lee's classmate to the hospital. Of course, Mu didn't care about his health. He was more curious about how they managed to call for help so quickly using just a mobile phone. As the ambulance drove off, Mu waved his hand, saying goodbye to his first opponent and wishing to meet him again someday. That's when one of the teachers, who was absolutely furious, appeared behind him and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they got there, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and asking if he'd completely lost his mind. He demanded to know why he'd done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over, and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hand. But Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he actually blushed. He looked excited, thrilled even, as if he was already thinking about the chance to fight another opponent soon. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher change his mind immediately and stop his hand midair. Not wanting to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital, he decided to skip the punishment altogether. Instead, he turned around and told Mu, who he believed was Lee Ho, to bring his parents to school tomorrow. Mu had braced himself, expecting to get hit by the teacher, but when the punishment, which meant confirmation of the battle, didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others. Without saying much, Mu did as he was told and left the school. On his way to Lee's house, Mu's mind wandered. Unlike other gods who have complete knowledge of the worlds they're responsible for, Mu wasn't sure what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since nothing else made sense to him, he assumed it was just that. He decided to use this unexpected free time to heal from the injuries he'd gotten earlier and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to fight more opponents in the future, he needed to get stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain of the damage he'd taken. At that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers, like mana, to heal himself faster. Mana, as Mu understood it, was a power beyond what most of humans were capable of. In some places it was called chi or chakra, but most gods referred to it as mana. To put it simply, mana was the life force that existed everywhere in nature. It gave humans extraordinary abilities, allowing them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or even powerful players in different realms. But here, in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he wanted to. For now, he would just have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded Mu of the moment during his earlier battle, when he'd tried to use mana and failed there too. Frustrated, he finally realized he would need to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Lee's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing that his recovery would take a lot of time, and that there wasn't much he could do about it, he made the decision to return to the god's realm to check on what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Lee Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy, who had always been bullied on Earth, now turned to God Mu as soon as he noticed him. Letting go of the dragon, Lee approached Mu with a newfound confidence and demanded that Mu hand the dragon over to him. Lee didn't know who Mu really was. He had no idea he was talking to a god. All he knew was that he was only temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. Lee wanted to take control of the dragonling for himself, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. Mu, however, didn't like how Lee was acting, so arrogant and commanding. Without hesitation, Mu summoned a godly hand and tightly grabbed hold of Lee, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Lee was completely shocked. He didn't expect this to happen at all, but God Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him off to somewhere else without a second thought. Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance to live in another world, but the look on his face suggested he had something else on his mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered the scene confidently, his firm steps making it clear to anyone around that he was there. Of course, there wasn't anyone else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet, Elmur. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without even bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer was just some ordinary guy. Naturally, Lucifer wasn't thrilled about Mu's rude behavior. Without even giving them a chance to explain why they were there, Lucifer immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to hear them out. But Mu didn't care about Lucifer's opinion in the slightest. He flatly told him to open the gate because he was about to send the boy to the planet Elmur. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elmur wasn't Mu's planet, so he had no right to make such a decision. On the other hand, Mu wasn't having it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario, making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it, anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, so he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to handle everything himself without waiting for Lucifer. As Mu approached and touched the surface of Elmur's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden among the gods. He warned Mu that if a god who isn't in charge of a domain touches it, an unbreakable barrier would activate and block all access. And just as Lucifer said, the barrier appeared. But to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Then, Mu opened his godly hand and released Li Ho, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmur's planet. Li hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Li once again asked Mu to give him the Dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his own assistant and simply shot Li straight into Elmur's planet, forcefully sending him to Isekai. After that, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days don't want to work for what they want and just expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else left to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before departing. Lucifer, on the other hand, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, the one who stood above all life on Elmur's planet. After claiming the title of the strongest, Lucifer, in his arrogance, dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world. Back then, in the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that quickly transformed into a massive sword, a magical blade far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack. Overwhelmed, he was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place, but even that wasn't enough to satisfy him. He went on to challenge every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne. As a demon, he became the god of gods. Absolute, invincible, supreme, legendary, and one of a kind among them all. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him just like he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. That day, consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer made a vow. He promised himself that he would get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back to the present, Mu was casually riding atop his Dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Just like Lucifer, who's counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation, the bully from Li's school, who had just regained consciousness, couldn't wait to see Li dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, the boy grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Li a lesson. Fueled by burning anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of that person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was going hard on a punching bag. That guy's name was Kang Cheol, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kang stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body. and turned to see whose phone was making that ridiculous noise. That's when another guy, a blonde, walked in and casually said it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered, sounding irritated. That guy was Hyung Chul, a boxer with 2 years of experience under his belt. As expected, the caller was none other than the beaten-up bully. With desperation in his voice, and without any introduction, he told Hyung he'd buy him a new phone if he wanted, but asked him to do one small favor first. At first, Hyung was a bit surprised to hear the request, but since it sounded like an easy and good deal, he agreed, and asked what he needed to do in return. The next day, during class, when everything seemed normal again, the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly went silent for a moment, with everyone's eyes fixed on him. Then, the murmurs and whispers started. The students were talking about how someone who used to bully others ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To show he wasn't someone to mess with, he slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled at them, saying he could still take them all down, even when he got neutered. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. That's when the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing that girl dared to talk to him like that for the first time only made him angrier. Frustrated that even the class president dared to stand up to him, he completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and tried to throw it at her to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to. Before he could do anything, the door suddenly swung open, and a massive, Hulk-like teacher walked into the classroom, demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat and acted as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing, clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason he told the girl to meet him after class. Something that the girl got curious to know why. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed, and it turned out he wanted a favor. Since she was the class president and someone he could trust, he asked her to check on Lee Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. It was framed as a request, but the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home. When no one responded, she hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked, so she slowly stepped inside the house. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right there, in front of her, was Lee's lifeless-looking body, surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide-and-seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back completely white, and his mouth was wide open. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to figure out what had happened. Lee had probably fainted from pure starvation, abandoned by Godmu, who had left his body earlier. He was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize him. Just then, something strange happened. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched. In an instant, Mu returned to Lee's body. The moment Mu opened his eyes, he was completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he'd ended up there. Before he could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. Looking down, he realized something was attached to his hand. It was the fourth line delivering the nutrient serum. As a god who had lived only for battle and fighting, Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, God Mu immediately figured out that it was sending something into his body, and only through his vessels. With his godly knowledge of what was happening inside him, it didn't take long for him to realize it was nutrients. He could sense his body absorbing them rapidly, speeding up his recovery. To Mu, it felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started moving his head around, regaining consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However, the creepy smile on his face made her think he was a little crazy. Still, she asked if Lee knew what had happened to him that caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher, as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that, he didn't thank her. Instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else entirely. The girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived here. Pulling the serum out of his hand, he gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave him a side glance. Honestly, in her eyes, this boy looked like anything but an athlete. Add to that the poor, dirty condition of his house. It didn't exactly show if he really cares about sports. Still, after a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him. It wasn't anything fancy, just an outdoor gym at a nearby park with some simple workout equipment. Not wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break, sweat dripping off his body. As he looked around, Mu couldn't help but feel impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he'd last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress as the Earth God. Seeing even these basic workout machines left him in awe. Back in his time, humans trained with something entirely different, primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary in Mu's eyes. Mu started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of them actually worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small, like a pebble, hit him on the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten-up bully from earlier, and this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hyung, to fight him. Even with the boxer beside him, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about his barking. Calmly, he sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. The beaten-up guy, feeling a little braver now that Hyung was there to back him up, shouted that he was the one who did it. He started ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hyung, his cousin and a professional boxer, was going to beat him to death. But before he could finish explaining, Mu saw an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone, and of course, Mu couldn't have been happier about it. That was on Earth, but in the realm of the gods, things were a bit more complicated. The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mu was nowhere to be seen. As his only assistant, the Dragonling had to attend the meeting in his place. With his lord absent, the nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message. Before the Dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter, Lucifer suddenly interrupted. Glaring at the dragon, he demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first, as if he were someone important. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor Dragonling out of his wits. Panicked, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence. Determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated, the Dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice, but the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that, and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased, but now even ignored the meeting and the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mu's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds. As the third strongest god, and of course as someone already in Mu's playthings list, the archer god finally spoke up. He argued that if same as always, any abnormalities occurred, even on Earth, they were the ones who always should take care of them instead of Mu, and that was most unacceptable thing for strongest god among them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again, his voice booming with frustration. He shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to solve something usually ended up making things worse. To make his argument more convincing, Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the 9th-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the brink of destruction. Back then, a massive ugly creature, as large as the Cyclops planet itself, attacked, a rare being known as a void creature, capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through the middle of it, splitting it into two unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu. With his usual cheerful and flushed face, delighted at the chance for a fight, Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature in an instant. Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops god, see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties. Having made his case, and likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray, begging his lord to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifts back to Earth, where the beaten guy started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him once more that his boxer cousin is going to make him pay for what he did to him. Hyung, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curious, he asked if Mu practiced any sports, like martial arts, but Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports, because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hyung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident, dumb middle schooler. Spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk, Hyung took a fighting stance and said he was ready to fight, just as Mu had apparently wanted. Hyung decided to start first, moving quickly to test this guy and see if he was all talk or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face before Mu could dodge or block. But despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Hyung. There was something strange, something downright unusual about this opponent, and it sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observed his opponent's movements, Hyung found it strange that Mu didn't move an inch, even when he had clearly been watching the punch coming from the start. Just like the beaten guy who had hired him, Hyung had no idea that his opponent wasn't human, but a god. And not just any god, a god who was absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hyung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit was like a signal, confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hyung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then, out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hyung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hyung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a dumb copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hyung blocked it with his hand effortlessly, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hyung sliding backward, surprising him completely. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating his opponent's strength. He couldn't believe how much power this seemingly weak and scrawny guy had. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly, just by copying what Hyung had done earlier. There was one thing Mu had to take into account. His current body wasn't something he could rely on just yet. When he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arm muscles screaming in pain, like they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight. For him, it only made the battle even more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Hyung's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble for him, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten guy, still watching from the sidelines, thought using a belt made the fight unfair. But neither Mu nor Hyung cared about his opinion. Hyung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches, left, right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a pretty rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hyung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu started analyzing his opponent's movements, only to realize they were fast and precise, but way too predictable. Just by observing Hyung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first, it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hyung's attacks with ease. And if that wasn't enough, when Hyung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Hyung to process what had just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by the way Hyung reacted. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins or something, as they seemed to share the same overly dramatic tendencies. Mu didn't waste much time though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hyung, knocking him out cold for a little while. The sight left his friend, or cousin, or whoever he was, completely stunned. Things went from bad to worse for him as Mu's face shifted into a scary, excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they'd messed with him. The once bully, the guy who had been so arrogant earlier, knew in that moment that with Hyung out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer to the beaten-up guy, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and so there was no joy or honor in beating up someone acting so scared. The beaten-up guy, for a moment, noticed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and just admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one quick move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now, and even if he wanted to, Mu already had more than enough reason to beat him again. As expected, Mu didn't show a shred of mercy and kept hitting the guy however he wanted, testing out his new copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body were covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to the guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for that guy, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered, with a mocking tone in his mind, why the guy wouldn't just admit defeat, but deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do so. After finishing with both of them, Mu walked away, knowing he had other things to take care of. Not to mention, like all his previous opponents, he left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings. The beaten-up bully, on the other hand, after learning his painful lesson, was muttering Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house. Sitting on his bed, he felt great knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted, and he could enjoy fighting almost every day. However, just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones that often gave him trouble, even breaking easily while defending himself, were annoying and a bit concerning. Still, in order to hold on to this feeling, a mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body, Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He decided to return to the God Realm first to see what was going on there and to get what he had asked the Dragonling to prepare for him. Like always, he focused and, while sitting, tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form. But this time, unlike before when his soul would transfer instantly, several seconds passed and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around, only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God Realm. The reason for this incident went back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain. That was when Mu had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, in that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer and, without caring about his opinion, came and went as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits. On his way back to his domain that day, the Dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it, but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body on Earth recover faster. There was just one small problem. Magical items were common on Elmer and a few other planets under Lucifer's control. They were abundant in those worlds because of the plentiful mana there. Unlike Earth, where magical items and objects can only be obtained through divine blessings or whims, they are incredibly rare. Because of that, only a handful of people throughout human history have been able to use them. Naturally, those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after, Mu arrived at his domain, where the Dragonling had promised to find a recovery magic orb for him the next time he returned to the God Realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming Gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched in his pants, saying he had prepared something for him because of all the complaining. To the assistant's disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter, and of course we already know what's written inside it. After delivering his message and doing what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface again to return to Li's body. The Dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince him to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving. But all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him, just like before, and transferred his soul back to Earth. Unbeknownst to both of them, a small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the God's realm for a while. That's when it hit Lucifer, realizing the time has come to act. This was his chance, a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge. There was no way he was going to miss it. Without any warning and determined to get rid of the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly used his life taxidermy spell. As the spell activated, sharp purple lightning bolts, shaped like spears, appeared above the Dragonling. But the Dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him. Not one to be caught off guard, he leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked sharply. His eyes glowed with intensity as he pressed further, seeking confirmation. "Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of Earth? Are you serious?" Lucifer, now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, floated slowly in midair. Then, with a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant, and he didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The Dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that looked more like a laser, shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack, but even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side of it. The explosion was massive, so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. First, he used it to protect himself, then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch. He didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing. The waves and flames from the explosion, like the aftermath of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstoppable force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer or the Dragonling, nor anyone else took any damage. Realizing his first deadly attack had been completely useless against Lucifer, the Dragonling decided to use his ultimate move, Polymorph Release. The moment he activated it, his entire body began to transform. Not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear just how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer wasn't the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and announced confidently, "I'll deal with you as Mu's little girl easily. Then, it'll be Mu's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, however, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master, no matter what it cost him. But things didn't go as the dragon had planned. Mu's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, unable to even leave a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave, casually stating that the atmosphere here wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else, however, was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the Dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him and, with a piercing side glance, demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer god, however, just kept floating away, casually responding that he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer, but he made it clear he was fine with it, as long as the archer god didn't interfere. Then, turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Mu's expulsion. But after witnessing the dragonling's state, someone as powerful as a god utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragon was still alive, and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Mu. But Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Mu wasn't here and was instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know this secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. And in that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now, why Lucifer had suddenly decided to rebel against Mu. Lucifer, however, didn't admit that he'd learned the secret by spying on God Mu. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the dragon, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragonling couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer. Using his massive tail, he launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard. But once again, things didn't go as he planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon. Whether it was a spear or a sword, it didn't even matter. Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces, and there was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him off. He knew that as long as Mu's assistant was alive, he could use him to find Mu on Earth. The thought of confronting him in that weak human body and making him suffer after all the humiliations Lucifer had endured filled him with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air, while the dragonling coughed up blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to do anything to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hyung. Covered in wounds, he was getting harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight. To make things worse, he was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him, and as Hyung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he was in. Just as he reached the exit door, Kang walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kang immediately noticed Hyung's beaten-up appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him and his hand. Hyung, feeling embarrassed, couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random, weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into Hyung's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened. To make it more convincing, he even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face, trying to look like an innocent victim who was just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him, casually reminding Hyung that he had no one to blame but himself. Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word. Seeing his plan fail, and with Kang now out of sight, Hyung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way!" For a moment, Hyung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him, and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed. He couldn't stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body, his frustration and confusion growing by the second. Based on his divine knowledge and of course his experience, there could only be one reason why he wasn't able to return. It had to be that his body was seriously damaged. Even this reason didn't sit right with Mu. He was convinced that not only was a dragonling, someone as strong as a god, protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. His eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. He suddenly jumped out of the bed, panicked. If his theory was right, he didn't have time to waste. He needed to act fast. But try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, and that only made him angrier. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release his anger. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods, who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one, were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to hold back his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that chance, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. Finally, after a few minutes of messing around, he got tired and stopped punching. He realized it was better to calm down and think things through. He reminded himself that the dragonling, his protector, wasn't someone who'd go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped God Mu calm down a little. He started to think, if I can't do anything about my original body right now, I might as well focus on this one. At least it'll give me a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area. This time he was putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, ignoring his arm muscles for the moment. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were screaming in pain. But oddly enough, that pain made the training more enjoyable for him. While he was hanging and pulling himself up, the more pain he felt, the louder he laughed. He laughed so hard it echoed around the place. Of course, his obnoxious laughter made everyone around him think he was some crazy, creepy kid. Just hearing and seeing him annoyed them to no end. In the middle of his intense training, someone suddenly called his name. The unexpected voice startled Mu, causing him to lose focus and fall straight to the ground with a loud thud. The person who called him was none other than the girl from before, Lee's class president. She was clearly annoyed, but not because of Mu's loud noises. No, she was upset because Lee hadn't shown up to school for several days. To avoid making a scene, they decided to have their conversation somewhere calmer. They found a bench in a quiet corner and sat down. Mu started the conversation, casually saying, "Why would I need to go to school? It's not exactly a place where I can train my body." Hearing this, the girl frowned and asked, "Why does he want to train all the time anyway?" Mu shrugged and replied simply, "I train to get stronger, that's it." The class president tilted her head and asked, "And why do you want to get stronger?" Mu grinned and said, "To fight better and take on bigger opponents, of course. My body's too weak right now, and that makes everything harder." From there, Mu launched into an excited rant, rambling on about his reasons for fighting and training. He talked for hours, barely stopping to breathe. The girl had no choice but to sit there and listen to his endless nonsense. By the time the sun was starting to set, she still hadn't managed to convince Mu, to come back to school. She was running out of ideas, but then, suddenly, an idea clicked in her mind. Casually, as if it were no big deal, she said, "What's the point of training so hard if there's no one to fight you?" Her words hung in the air, catching Mu completely off guard. To make his point clear, he asked Lee to take a look around, pointing out that there's no one here who could challenge him, no matter how strong he gets. The girl stood up and, as she started to leave, said, "All you have to do is come to school, meet some people, and start some conflict. Then, you'll have plenty of people to fight." With that, she walked off, leaving the boy to think it over. As she left, Mu couldn't help but feel a little impressed by her reasoning. She had a point. After what he did to those poor bullies, they wouldn't dare come near him again. And without them, he needed to find someone stronger to fight if he wanted to improve and make this body stronger. For the first time, he actually considered going to school. Just as he was mulling it over, a shadowy figure appeared behind him and called out, asking if he was Lee Ho. The figure was wearing a mask to hide his identity and carrying a weapon. Mu, on the other hand, didn't bother answering the question. He already knew what this was about. His shocked expression shifted into one of relief. Things were going much easier than he had expected. Now, he didn't even need to search for his next opponent, as his opponent had come straight to him. With a small smirk, Mu simply turned his head, calmly preparing himself for the inevitable first strike and the confirmation of battle. It was obvious that the masked guy was Kang Cheol, but there was something about Kang that set him apart from the other bullies Mu had faced. Years ago, when he was just 15 and starting to excel in boxing, his sister had become a promising rookie ballerina. As her only family, Kang supported her in every way he could, mentally, emotionally, and however else he was able to help. Everything was going well until she caught the attention of a creepy stalker. Soon the man's obsession grew worse with each passing day, until one day, he completely lost control and crossed the red line. He secretly followed her, and when she turned into a quiet alley, he decided to make his move to carry out his sick intentions. Luckily, Kang happened to be nearby and saw what was going on. Before the stalker could harm his sister, Kang jumped in and, with a surprise attack, managed to stop him before any damage was done. The police were called and the stalker was arrested, but because Kang had stepped in before anything illegal actually happened, there wasn't enough evidence to punish him properly. The man was released not long after, but his obsession had now reached a dangerous peak. It had turned into madness, mixed with a thirst for revenge. Before long, the creepy man found the girl again, this time in another quiet spot. But now, he had brought along a kitchen knife, clearly planning something much more cruel. However, Kang showed up once again, seemingly out of nowhere, and stopped the crime. But this time he wasn't fast enough. His sister's leg was badly injured, and her future as a ballerina was shattered, like a swan with broken wings. Kang blamed the law for failing to protect her, and from that day on, he decided he couldn't trust it anymore. Instead, he vowed to do whatever he thought was right. His first act? Beating that creepy man within an inch of his life. But that was just the beginning. Kang resolved to handle what the law couldn't. Whenever he came across a suspicious gang or someone who looked like they were about to bully or harm others for no reason, Kang would step in. He'd give them a warning, not with words, but with a not-so-gentle move using his new favorite weapon. Fate turned Kang into an anti-bully vigilante, someone who saw fighting not as violence, but as judgment. And so, the reason he came after Mu wasn't much different. Back to the present, Mu stood there, accepting Kang's preemptive punch without any resistance. Even though he got hit with a surprise attack from behind, something that could have easily knocked him out, Mu quickly realized it was just a light punch, nothing like the heavy blows he was used to as a first strike. He couldn't help but wonder if Kang just wanted to test his reflexes, or if the punch was meant as some kind of warning. Either way, Mu didn't care. All he needed was confirmation to start the fight, and now he had it. As usual, Mu wasn't exactly dissatisfied about being in another fight, completely clueless that this opponent wasn't going to be as easy as the others. Kang, however, didn't rush to begin the fight officially. He hesitated, surprised by the fact that Mu wasn't running around beating people up for fun like he'd been told. Kang had no idea it was all a lie made up by Hyung to impress him. Mu, on the other hand, had no interest in explaining himself or clearing up the misunderstanding. He casually ignored Kang's questions and told him to stop wasting time with small talk and do something already. That, of course, hit a nerve with Kang and only made him believe Hyung's story even more, further convincing him that Mu really was as crazy as he'd heard. Kang did exactly what Mu asked for. He dashed forward and started trying to beat him up without wasting any time. Mu, however, stayed on guard and prepared to defend himself, like he was a pro boxer or something. Kang didn't hold back, throwing punch after punch, but surprisingly, Mu dodged every single one of them. With each dodge, Mu's confidence grew bit by bit. Seeing this, Kang quickly realized that his opponent wasn't just all talk like other bullies. He actually knew a thing or two about fighting. So, Kang decided to step it up a notch and use one of his boxing tricks. He threw a light right punch to block Mu's vision, planning to catch him off guard and land a heavy strike using the opening. But to Kang's surprise, Mu had already anticipated the move and blocked it too. For Kang, though, this was just a warm-up. It felt like he'd found the perfect punching bag to practice on. He started throwing punches again, but this time, Mu could clearly feel the difference in power compared to the earlier strikes. As expected from a champion boxer, Kang used his skills and experience to keep the pressure on, refusing to give Mu even a moment to catch his breath. Punch after punch came at him, relentless and powerful. On the other hand, Mu was completely cornered and couldn't do much. Kang was relentlessly targeting Mu's weak spots, making it almost impossible for him to focus on the fight. Things got even worse when Kang found an opening and landed a bone-crushing punch to Mu's side. The pain hit him instantly. It was like getting kicked in the balls twice in a row. Kang backed off for a moment, letting Mu deal with the sharp pain in his side, but not without making a point. He coldly mentioned that he was deliberately going after Mu's weak and injured spots because, in his judgment, unworthy people didn't deserve any mercy. But instead of being scared, impressed, or even angry, Mu, still struggling with his pain, started laughing. That laugh threw Kang off for a moment, but then it got under his skin. He couldn't believe Mu's reaction and it made him furious, pushing him to become even more ruthless than before. Meanwhile, Mu had already figured out the massive gap between Kang's strength and his own. It was painfully clear. This guy was on a completely different level than him with Lee's body. Mu knew he couldn't beat Kang in raw power, but as someone obsessed with fighting, giving up wasn't an option. Admitting defeat wasn't in his nature. Facing a stronger opponent who didn't fight fair, Mu realized he'd have to play by the same rules. He just needed to focus, stay sharp, and wait for the right opening. As someone with thousands of years of battle experience, he quickly recalled one of his fights that felt eerily similar to his current situation. It was one of those rare, 1-in-1,000 battles where Mu was nearly overpowered. Even in those painful moments, he never regretted fighting. He always felt a strange satisfaction from the thrill of it. But back then, it wasn't just about enjoying the fight or even the pain. Mu wanted to win, no matter what. So, he forced himself to calm down, shutting off all his emotions. For a brief moment, the creepy grin disappeared from his bruised, ugly face as he started to carefully analyze his opponent's movements. When another punch was about to come straight for his face, Mu made a move. Using his dirty, torn cloak, he distracted his opponent just enough to create an opening for himself. The more Mu thought and used his tiny, bird-sized brain, the smarter and more dangerous he became. Back then, he managed to capitalize on that opening and landed several direct hits on the giant monster he was fighting. But to his disappointment, his attacks didn't seem to have much of an effect. That thing was on a whole different level than him. Despite knowing he was outmatched, Mu didn't stop. He kept using his small brain to find openings while keeping his emotions in check, refusing to give in or give up. Mu was defeated that day and somehow managed to survive. But even in those agonizing moments, he couldn't help but enjoy the thrill of slipping through it. The situation now wasn't much different, so Mu decided to use the same strategy, shutting down his emotions and using his brain to try and win. If that didn't work, well, then he could at least enjoy getting beaten up. His first move was to shut off his emotions and put on a sullen expression, but since he had no clue how Lee's face would look after suppressing his feelings, he just forced himself to improvise for the time being. His new expression, combined with his already ugly face, irritated Kang more than ever. It pushed Kang to the peak of his anger, as he thought Mu was mocking him on purpose. This time, Kang charged at him, determined to finish it once and for all with his raw power. Mu, however, acted like he was just fooling around, pretending to be completely unaware of what was coming his way. As Kang kept moving forward, throwing punches wildly, Mu stepped back, dodging the attacks as best as he could. It didn't take long before his back hit a tree, making him realize he needed to switch tactics. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. He dug his foot into the ground and, with a quick motion, kicked dirt up as fast as he could. Some of it managed to hit Kang's face, but since Kang was wearing protective glasses and quickly shielded his face with his hands, it didn't do much damage. Instead, it only confirmed Kang's suspicion that Mu was a criminal who deserved a beating. All of a sudden, Mu lowered his head, causing Kang to hesitate for a moment, but it was all an act. Mu smirked and taunted him, asking if he'd stopped attacking because he was scared. The jab hit its mark, and Kang's temper skyrocketed, giving him all the motivation he needed to keep going. Without hesitation, Kang launched another attack. However, Mu, with his goofy-looking face, was surprisingly ready this time and dodged the punch with ease. But Kang wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. With a sudden move, Kang appeared behind Mu, trying to attack from his blind spot, but once again, Mu managed to dodge it. This time, though, Kang's fist grazed Mu's chin, causing a little damage. But it wasn't something Mu even cared about, because he was convinced his plan was working. Kang couldn't focus like before. It didn't take long for Mu to notice one of the biggest differences between Kang and the other two opponents he had fought earlier. Kang's fighting style was far more aggressive, unlike their defensive approach. In Mu's opinion, except skill and ability, the ground was the key reason for this difference. That also explained the real purpose behind throwing dirt earlier, not to actually hit Kang's protected face, but to scatter dirt and small rocks on the ground, creating countless obstacles that made it harder for Kang to move freely. Kang's aggressive fighting style, fueled by Mu's mocking behavior, made his moves predictable and easier to block with minimal effort. Everything was falling into place according to Mu's plan. After struggling to keep up and getting beaten earlier, Mu was now managing to dodge Kang's attacks again. But dodging wasn't his ultimate goal. He was trying to force Kang to move around recklessly, increasing the chances of him stepping on the scattered dirt and small rocks, eventually losing his balance. Soon, Mu got exactly what he was waiting for. Kang stepped on a small rock, lost his focus, and gave Mu the perfect opening. Wasting no time, Mu jumped into action, knowing he couldn't afford to miss this chance to turn the fight in his favor. He aimed for a vital spot, but mid-air, he realized his arm wasn't responding, probably from all the strikes he had blocked earlier. Still, he didn't let that stop him and used his elbow instead, landing a heavy blow. For a moment, Mu wondered why his arm had suddenly stopped working and forced him to use his elbow, but it didn't matter much. The elbow strike turned out to be way stronger than any punch he could have thrown. Kang's glasses shattered, and he was left stunned, completely caught off guard. Naturally, Mu couldn't resist using this moment to get under Kang's skin again. He started mocking him, throwing insults and making fun of how easily he'd been hit. But then something went wrong. Mu was so caught up in planning his next move and taunting Kang that he failed to notice what was happening in the moment. While Mu was busy mocking him, Kang had used his weapon and crushed Mu's leg. It didn't take long for Mu to feel the unbearable pain. He dropped to his knees, stunned, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Kang, now standing tall, rested his weapon on his shoulder, smirking. It was his turn to mock Mu. "What's the matter? Want to laugh and mess around now? Or is this not so funny anymore?" Kang had had enough of Mu. No one had ever annoyed him this much. so much so that he decided to break Mu's jaw, making sure he would never laugh again. Mu was still on his knees, unable to move even an inch to dodge or defend himself. Just before the blow landed, Mu realized something. He had lost. Mu closed his eyes, bracing himself for the hit, while his thoughts drifted. He wondered if, after nearly 4,000 years, he was finally going to taste failure again, and Kang was ready to remind him what that bitter moment felt like. But just a split second before Kang's strike could crush Mu's head, something, a piece of rock maybe, came flying out of nowhere and hit Kang directly in the face. The impact was so sudden that it made Kang stumble, and the object disappeared, rolling into the trees in an instant. Whatever it was, it stopped Kang's attack and saved Mu. Now distracted, Kang quickly looked around, trying to figure out who had thrown it. Things got even more complicated when he heard a faint, weak voice calling out, "Master," and getting closer. Kang's instincts kicked in. As someone who took pride in hunting bullies from the shadows, he couldn't risk being seen. Without wasting any time, Kang grabbed his sweatshirt, threw it on, pulling the hood over his head, and dashed away before anyone could appear and see his face. As soon as Kang disappeared, a small creature that looked like a monster appeared from behind and, with a trembling voice, called out, "Master!" Mu turned his gaze to see who was calling him, and to his surprise, it was a small, lizard-like creature with horns. As someone who had once raised that lizard to a dragon and made it worthy of being his assistant, Mu recognized it immediately, despite how different it looked now from a dragon. With no one else around to cause trouble, Mu and the dragonling headed back to Li's house. Once they were settled, the dragonling began explaining everything about Mu's current situation in the god's realm and his own story, that how ended up on Earth with this body. According to him, after his defeat against Lucifer, Lucifer found Mu's godly body and trapped it in an unbreakable, impenetrable barrier that separated time and space. This made it impossible for Mu's soul to return to his body. To ensure no one interfered with his plans, Lucifer took Mu's body to his own domain, where he kept a close watch on it. A satisfied smile was always on Lucifer's face, knowing that, without his body, Mu couldn't do much against him. However, there was one small problem. Lucifer couldn't enter Earth to finish him off so easily. There was only one way for him to do so. He had to convince the dragonling to reveal how he could access or enter Mu's planet. Lucifer also brought the defeated dragon to his domain, promising him that if he cooperated and helped him get to Earth to get rid of Mu, he would make the dragon the new god of Earth in Mu's place. Lucifer was confident that this offer might tempt Mu's assistant into betraying him for the chance to gain power. The dragonling, however, didn't give a clear response. Instead, he whispered something so quietly that Lucifer couldn't make out what he was saying. Annoyed, Lucifer demanded that he speak louder, at least enough for him to hear his answer. Finally, the dragonling spoke up, but instead of answering directly, he pointed at the barrier around Mu. He asked Lucifer if the barrier, which could block time and space, could also stop attacks from passing through it. Lucifer assumed the dragonling was asking because he wanted to rescue Mu, so he confidently assured him that no attack could harm or penetrate the barrier. He even emphasized how invincible it was and told the dragonling to just give up and consider joining his side instead. But then something strange happened. Lucifer noticed the surroundings were starting to get brighter. Suspicious, he turned to see what was going on, and what he saw made him freeze. The dragonling's injured body was glowing with a golden light, crackling with energy. At first, Lucifer was shocked, trying to figure out what the dragonling was planning. But his shock quickly turned to fear when the dragonling suddenly shouted, "Massive self-explosion!" In that moment, before Lucifer could react, the roof of his castle, the very place he used as the base to control his domain, was completely shattered. But in the next second, his entire castle was obliterated, disappearing like it had been hit by a nuclear bomb. And yet, that wasn't even the craziest part. The explosion was so massive that it burned an entire side of the god's realm to ashes. The dragonling had used 99% of his strength for that explosion, and as a result, he reverted to his smallest, weakest form, a tiny lizard. Covered in smoke and dust, he did his best to make a run for it before Lucifer realized what had happened. Knowing there was nowhere safe for him anymore, the poor lizard had only one place to go, back to his master on Earth. But Lucifer wasn't about to let him escape that easily. Emerging from the dust, furious and betrayed, Lucifer stormed after him, clearly angry enough to turn the lizard into stew for what he saw as an abuse of his kindness. The dragonling sprinted as fast as he could, desperate to stay out of Lucifer's reach. But before he could make it, Lucifer summoned a magical spear and hurled it at him with all his might. The little dragonling, now missing part of his tail, was only a few meters away from Mu's throne and the gateway to Earth. Despite everything, the magical spear missed him, and he managed to leap onto Mu's throne, then onto the miniature Earth's surface, vanishing from godly domain and reappearing in Earth's sky. Completely drained of energy, Mu's poor assistant didn't even care where or how he was going to land. He simply closed his eyes and let fate decide for him. And, as it turned out, fate had chosen him to be his master's savior. The object that had hit Kang's face earlier, stopping him from landing the final blow, was none other than this tiny, exhausted lizard. That was everything he could remember, and Mu, after hearing the Dragonling's explanation about everything that had happened, fell deep into thought. His now small assistant couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong, but as expected, Mu wasn't sad. He was furious. Furious enough at Lucifer that, if he ever got the chance to return to his original body, he wouldn't let Lucifer live another second. All of a sudden, Mu's expression shifted from anger to excitement as he realized he finally had a chance to fight Lucifer again, a proper, all-out battle. Even the little one, his assistant, after all these years wasn't used to how quickly Mu's attitude and emotions could change, so he was a bit startled by it. Mu sprang out of Lee's bed, buzzing with excitement, finding yet another purpose to keep going, but deep down, he knew he stood no chance against Lucifer in this body. The only option was to work harder and make Lee's body stronger. However, Lee's weak, battered body was in such bad shape that even throwing a light punch at the air made him feel like everything was breaking. Mu couldn't help but wish this new body could heal faster. Then, it hit him. He had told Dragonling to find a magical orb for him the last time they met. Turning to the small lizard, he asked, almost hopelessly, if there was any chance he got that and had brought it back to Earth. To his surprise, Dragonling had actually brought the magic orb, or at least that's what it claimed. Since he didn't have anything like a pocket or bag to carry it, the little lizard had been hiding the orb deep in his stomach. Now, at Mu's request, he slowly began to cough it up. But because the orb was bigger than the lizard itself, Mu's assistant struggled a bit to deliver it to his god. Once he finally finished, Dragonling explained that it was a dragon bloodstone infused with a one-time healing spell. The little lizard apologized for only bringing one, saying he was in a hurry, and of course, he couldn't carry more. Mu didn't wait for his assistant's saliva to dry and immediately picked it up to take a closer look. As soon as he held it in his hand, he thanked Dragonling and told him this orb would be more than enough for now. Without hesitation, Mu activated the orb, releasing its healing effect immediately, making it to shrink in size simultaneously. Only a few moments later, Mu's body was surrounded by a green aura radiating from the orb, and his wounds started healing instantly. But that wasn't even the best part. Mu suddenly noticed something surprising. The orb's effect wasn't just limited to healing. He could feel his muscles becoming more responsive, almost sensitive in a way they weren't before. There was only one explanation. The orb must have also been infused with a body enhancement spell, which was visibly improving Lee's weak body. Noticing Mu's impressed reaction, Dragonling proudly admitted that he'd personally put effort into it and infused his own magic into the dragon bloodstone. Mu appreciated it as he stared at the leftover remains of the orb, thinking that it must be because it was used on a weak human body. Not all of its power had been consumed, which explained the leftover fragment. He handed it to the little lizard, giving him permission to use it for himself. However, Dragonling didn't want to waste it on himself. Instead, he decided to store it for Mu to use later in case of an emergency. Just like before, he carefully pushed it back to its resting place, deep inside his stomach. The scene suddenly shifted to a rare yellow lizard on the other side of the city. Surprisingly, it was the favorite pet of the girl from earlier. She didn't see it as just an animal. It was one of her closest friends. She even wished it could talk so that neither of them would ever get bored. Not long after, she stopped playfully annoying her pet and returned it to its cozy home. She needed to head out, likely to school. Since pets weren't allowed there, she needed to leave it behind to live its own life for a while. Peace returned to her home as she attempted to leave, but that day, life at school was no different. Everything seemed calm and peaceful. No one was bossing others around or causing any trouble. Even the beaten-up bully from before was quietly sitting at his desk. Now wearing glasses, he was fully focused on his studies. The pain he had endured after facing Mu had knocked some sense into him. Instead of wasting his time, he was now preparing for exams, determined to turn things around. Everything was fine until Mu decided to make one of his usual over-the-top, dramatic entrances into the classroom. The moment he walked in, he noticed the beaten-up guy and, without hesitation, asked if he wanted to go for another round of fighting. It wasn't clear if Mu was just messing with him or being completely serious, but before he could get an answer, the president girl appeared behind him, acting all surprised to see that Lee had actually decided to show up at school after being absent for so long. Mu, with the little lizard crawling under his shirt and causing a slight commotion, casually replied that he was only here because she had convinced him earlier. Of course, he added that the only reason he came was to look for someone to fight and beat to death. His intimidating expression and choice of words made the girl wonder what kind of chaos he was planning to stir up this time. But since there didn't seem to be any immediate signs of trouble, she just wished him good luck. Half of the day passed, and nothing exciting happened to make Mu's day interesting. On the floor below his class, two students were chatting about the recent events at school. Those two happened to be Kang and a girl from his class. Since he always seemed so clueless about anything going on at school, the girl was filling Kang in about the second-year student who had recently been humiliated. She explained the details with a bit of gossiping flair, while Kang listened with mild curiosity, still trying to piece together what had been happening around him. As the school day came to an end, Kang and the girl began walking toward the exit, with her eagerly explaining everything she'd heard in detail. According to the rumors and what she knew, the nerdy guy, who used to get bullied all the time, had one day turned the tables on his tormentor. He beat the bully so badly that the guy lost consciousness and had to be rushed to the hospital. If that wasn't shocking enough, the nerd had supposedly ripped off the bully's ear in a wild move, earning him the nickname Neutered from then on. Kang had no idea at first that she was talking about Lee. But as she described the incident, along with Hyung's appearance, especially his ripped-off ear and Mu's suspicious behavior, Kang quickly pieced it all together. There was a high chance that the nerdy guy she was talking about and Lee were the same person. It suddenly hit Kang. Hyung's crocodile tears and his whole act of pretending to be a victim had been a ploy to manipulate him into taking action. But since it was all in the past and there was nothing he could do about it now, Kang decided to let it go, at least for the time being. On his way back home, what Kang didn't realize was that he was taking the same path as Mu. Mu, meanwhile, was feeling disappointed and frustrated that his day had turned out to be so dull. Everyone at school had been too busy scribbling away on their notebooks or phones, and there hadn't been a single invitation to fight, or even the confirmation of one. Just as Mu was about to sink further into hopelessness, something caught his eye. It was Kang, of course, awkwardly walking and looking visibly embarrassed as he chatted with his female friend. Since Kang was wearing glasses and a mask to hide his face yesterday, Mu didn't recognize him right away, but something about him felt oddly familiar. His hair color, height, and build seemed similar, but his muscle size and its form was the one that sparked Mu's suspicion. In just a second, that suspicion turned into certainty. He completely lost control and shouted, "It's that guy from yesterday!" His loud voice and sudden outburst, of course, caught Kang's attention. Kang turned his head, and the moment he did, he saw Mu charging toward him with a crazed look on his face. Without thinking twice, Kang bolted, running as fast as he could, leaving his shocked friend behind. As Kang sprinted away, he couldn't stop wondering how Mu had recognized him. He was sure the expensive mask and glasses he'd bought were enough to hide his identity, so why was this lunatic chasing after him? Kang couldn't come up with an answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let himself get caught. The last thing he wanted was for this crazy guy to report him to the police or something equally disastrous. Desperate to escape, Kang decided to make an unpredictable move. He spotted an alley up ahead and, without hesitation, veered off his path, jumping straight into it in hopes of losing Mu. Mu kept chasing after him, determined not to let Kang get away so easily. But as he turned into the alley, Kang was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Mu had been looking forward to using this perfect chance to fight Kang, but his hopes were crushed when he realized he was gone. Dragonling popped out of Mu's shirt, asking if that was the same guy who had dared to challenge his lord yesterday. Wanting to help his god track down the rude human, the little lizard requested permission to sniff him out using the strong male scent he had picked up when Kang hit him the day before. Mu gave him the green light, and Dragonling immediately sprang into action, sniffing around like a well-trained puppy. Just as Mu's assistant was fully committing to his new role, someone suddenly appeared right in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. Lucky enough not to get stomped on, the little lizard tilted his head up to see who it was. To his surprise, it wasn't Kang at all, but the president girl from Lee's class. She stood there, stunned, staring at him with wide eyes. Her shock didn't last long, though. It quickly shifted to a delighted blush as she looked at the adorable little lizard. Clearly, it was her first time seeing something so cute, and she couldn't help but be intrigued. The Dragonling had no idea who this girl even was, unaware of the fact that unlike other humans, she actually loved lizards more than anything else. Without thinking about himself that he was a demigod and wasn't supposed to be seen by humans, he casually told the girl to step aside so he could finish his task. Things didn't go as he expected. The girl, completely ignoring what he said, fearlessly scooped up the little lizard in her hands like it was a stuffed toy. The Dragonling was totally caught off guard and struggled to wriggle free from her grip. Frustrated and feeling helpless, he snapped at her, giving an angry warning, reminding her that he wasn't someone she could just mess with or be rude to. For a brief moment, he wished he had even a tiny bit of his magic left to launch a spell and escape. But while the Dragonling saw this girl as a nuisance, maybe even an enemy, the girl didn't feel the same. In fact, she found him absolutely fascinating. Despite his strange and unique appearance, she couldn't believe she was holding a talking lizard in her hands. To her, he was the cutest, most adorable thing she'd ever seen, so much so that she instantly liked him even more than her own beloved pet, the one she'd always cherished above everything else. Suddenly, the dragonling spotted an opening and bolted, freeing himself and darting behind his lord for safety. Hiding behind Lee's body, he quickly apologized to God Mu for failing because of the girl, blaming it on the fact that he'd lost all his power. Before Mu could even respond, the girl approached him with a serious expression, one that looked downright terrifying to the little lizard. She asked if, by any chance, that tiny creature was his friend. Mu glanced at his visibly shaken assistant and somehow confirmed it by saying, "Friend? Not sure about that, but yes, that little one is my obedient assistant." The girl finally introduced herself as Kim Yujin, though it was obvious she was jealous. Jealous that Mu had such an obedient, talking, and, let's be real, adorable lizard. Her expression was so easy for Mu to read, and though he wasn't entirely sure why she looked so stunned and envious, an idea popped into his head. With a sudden and unexpected move, Mu shifted his leg, the one the dragonling was clutching onto for dear life, closer to the girl and said, "If you want, I could lend him to you for a bit, in exchange for a little information." Of course, the poor dragonling's opinion didn't matter to Mu in the slightest. And Yujin? She lit up at the offer. Obviously, she would do anything to hold the lizard for a while. Giving up some information was the smallest price for her to pay. Without waiting for her to respond, Mu reached down, grabbed the dragonling by the neck, and handed him over to her. "Take him. You can keep him as long as you like, but there's someone you have to help me find." Kim was so mesmerized by the lizard that she didn't hesitate to agree, not even stopping to ask if they were tracking down a criminal, a good person, or something else entirely, and of course, that was exactly what Mu wanted to see. Without a second thought, and as if he didn't care about his assistant at all, he casually tossed the little lizard toward her. To Kim's surprise, the poor thing spun midair and landed right on top of her head. The dragonling couldn't help but wonder how his lord could abandon him so easily, like he was nothing. Meanwhile, Mu didn't waste a moment. He started walking off, telling the dragonling to stay with Kim Yujin for a while and return on his own later. Still in shock, the dragonling tried to ask where his master was planning to go without him, but Mu just ignored him completely, acting like he'd suddenly found something exciting to do after what had been a dull day. Not long after, Kim and the dragonling arrived at her house, and things were, well, a little awkward. Kim couldn't help but wonder if the lizard was mad at her for being dragged along against his will, and truthfully, he wasn't thrilled about the situation. But since he couldn't defy his lord's orders, he sighed and introduced himself. After a moment, he stretched out his tiny hand and, trying to keep things professional, explained the situation to Kim. "As per my master's instructions," he said, "you'll be actively cooperating with me from now on." Kim was momentarily taken aback at the sight of a tiny lizard trying to boss her around, but the way he acted, and the fact that she could say or do whatever she wanted with him, made her heart skip a beat for a second. Still, she didn't want to come off as rude, so she placed her fingers on the dragonling's tiny hand and gave it a little shake to show respect. As she did, she asked, "By your master, do you mean Li Ho?" The dragonling didn't respond, but his silence seemed to confirm her guess. Taking that as her answer, Kim nodded and said she was willing to cooperate with him if that's what he wanted. Then, with a proud grin, she announced her position. "By the way, I'm the president of my class." The dragonling blinked, completely confused. "What's a president?" he asked, tilting his little head. Seeing his puzzled reaction, Kim chuckled and explained, "It means I'm like the leader of my class, and besides that, I'm also ranked first in my grade." Hearing this, the dragonling's eyes widened in realization. "Ah, so that's why my master chose this girl, because she's an important person." But as this thought settled in his mind, another realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. If this girl was the leader of her class, then that meant my lord wasn't the leader. Unable to hold back his curiosity, the dragonling asked, "Wait, does that mean Lord Li Ho isn't the leader of your class?" Kim paused for a moment, her expression shifting as she got lost in thought. After a few seconds, she finally replied, "Li Ho? He's not even an average student in our class. Honestly, he's one of the lowest in everything." The dragonling froze, utterly stunned by her answer. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to process the shocking information. The moment Mu's assistant realized what she said, he shouted in disbelief, thinking Kim was talking about Mu himself. The idea seemed completely impossible to him. To clear up what he assumed was a misunderstanding, the tiny lizard, now sweating with both discomfort and frustration, without mentioning Mu's name, firmly declared that his master was the strongest being in the entire world, stronger than any god. The dragonling, acting as if he were still in his terrifying dragon form, started bossing Kim around again. He demanded that she do her absolute best to help his master become even stronger so he could finally get his revenge. Kim, on the other hand, was impressed by what she assumed was the little lizard's wild imagination and sweet talks about Lee. Amused, she agreed to help, but only on one condition. Dragonling should accept to visit her often if he wanted her help. The Dragonling paused for a moment, considering her condition. In truth, he had already planned to use Kim as a human source to gather information about what was happening on Earth. And now her condition was the perfect excuse to visit her more often and get the intel he needed. Without hesitation, he agreed to her terms, and the two of them struck a deal. As the most loyal servant who had sacrificed his life countless times for his lord, the Dragonling was determined to do whatever it took to help his master reclaim the title of the strongest. Deep in his heart, he believed every move he made would bring his master closer to his rightful place at the top. At this time, Mu, who was also focused on getting stronger, was busy doing some intense, borderline crazy training with his newly strengthened body. Unlike before, when he struggled with even the simplest exercises, now he could handle everything with ease, like it was no big deal. As the sun began to set, Mu decided he'd done enough for the day. Jumping down from where he had been training, he glanced at his body, visibly satisfied with his newfound strength. Not only had he recovered much faster than he'd hoped, but his physical strength had almost doubled. Like always, almost like it was a habit, he decided to show his excitement by swinging a punch. But this time, instead of throwing a random punch into the air, he confidently aimed at an iron rod nearby. The results were better than he could have imagined. Not only did he not break any bones, but for the first time, he didn't even feel pain in his hand. For a moment, he was thrilled with himself. But then, his happy expression quickly faded into disappointment as he remembered why he had come all the way out here in the first place. He had hoped to see Kang, in addition to squeezing in some training. Now that the sun was almost gone, Mu figured it was better to head back. He realized there might be a better chance of running into Kang at school in the next few days anyway. With that thought in mind, he decided to call it a day and leave. Mu left the training spot, leaving behind a reminder mark there, forever. As he walked through the streets, the disgusting smell of his sweat clung to the air around him. Luckily, no one was nearby to catch a whiff of the unpleasant stench. But as Mu unintentionally reached Kim's neighborhood, his sweaty scent had gotten so strong that it seeped through the air and hit Dragonling's sharp senses. The tiny lizard, who was busy using the girl and her PC to gather information, froze the moment the smell hit him. As expected from a dragon with sharp senses, he recognized it instantly. Without wasting a second, Dragonling jumped down and left the girl behind to enjoy her peace and quiet. "Thanks a lot," he called out, waving as he dashed off. Now, acting more like an excited puppy than a dragon, Dragonling followed the scent trail, leaping from rooftops to walls in search of his master. It didn't take long for his keen nose to lead him straight to Mu. With one final leap, he dashed to the edge of a building and jumped right onto Mu's shoulder, landing perfectly in place. Mu was a little surprised to see him. The Dragonling greeted him and then proudly announced that he had completed what he thought was his mission. Neither of them realized that, in a nearby alley, someone was being beaten up. The Dragonling was thrilled that he had found a royal assistant for himself, one who promised loyalty to Mu too, but his excitement only distracted Mu, causing him to miss what was happening nearby as they walked past. However, after taking a few steps away, the Dragonling's sharp nose picked up something familiar. It was a scent that belonged to the guy he had been chasing earlier. The little lizard was right. It was Kang, acting like Batman and beating someone up in the shadows. But this time, the guy getting beaten wasn't just some bully or thug. He had stolen a bicycle. Instead of apologizing, the thief started threatening Kang, saying he'd send someone after him if Kang didn't let him go right away. As expected, that only confirmed for Kang that he had picked the right target, so he doubled down. Kang was so focused on dealing with the thief that he didn't realize Mu had appeared behind him, looking thrilled to have found him again. But it didn't last long. Kang quickly felt the danger behind him and turned to see who was secretly watching him. As soon as he spun around, he realized it was the same weird boy from the other day, the one who, despite admitting defeat, just wouldn't leave him alone. Everything seemed tense and on edge, except for the little Dragonling, who was facing the other way and clinging to Mu, insisting they were going the wrong way. The Dragonling kept pointing in another direction, saying they should head that way. As usual, Mu ignored his loyal companion and focused entirely on the person he had been searching for. Both of them locked eyes, Mu, looking determined, and Kang, unsure of what to do. Mu began moving, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. Kang, on the other hand, tried to explain that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, and that Mu shouldn't attack him like this. But Mu didn't care, not about the little lizard on his shoulder, nor about what Kang was trying to say. Mu suddenly picked up his pace, making it clear he was ready to strike. Kang still didn't show any intention of fighting back, at least, not until the very last moment. That's when he realized that if he didn't defend himself, things could go really, really badly for him. He quickly took a defensive stance, bracing himself to face Mu head-on. Kang had defeated Mu in the past, and the reason for his hesitation this time was that he realized Mu wasn't the kind of person who deserved to be beaten like he'd once thought. Mu, on the other hand, couldn't care less about what Kang thought. With his fully recovered and stronger body, he was confident and ready to face him again. Their clash seemed inevitable. Mu was determined to attack, and Kang was equally determined to defend himself. But surprisingly, nothing happened. Both of them froze in place, right in front of each other without making a single move. Mu had been pretending to attack, hoping to provoke Kang into making the first move so he'd have a reason to officially start the fight, but Kang didn't fall for it. The boxer guy, who had been watching Mu's movement closely, was shocked to see this wild-looking guy who had been chasing after him suddenly stop and show no intention of fighting. In the middle of their standoff, while Kang was fully focused on Mu, the thief seized the opportunity. With a quick move, he snatched Kang's weapon. Now, with the weapon in his hand and a solid excuse to fight, the thief was ready to make Kang regret ever defeating him so mercilessly. The thief swung the weapon at Kang, shouting in anger and aiming to seriously injure or even kill the boy, but Kang was faster than he expected. With a quick movement of his legs and a sharp turn of his head, Kang stepped out of the weapon's path just in time. As he dodged the attack, Kang realized that Mu was now the one directly in line to take the hit. Instead of feeling happy to see the creepy, overly persistent guy get hurt, Kang felt a pang of worry for his safety. But it was too late. He couldn't do anything to stop it now. Mu, on the other hand, had been watching the attack closely from beginning to end. He could have easily dodged it, or at least blocked it, but he didn't. After absorbing that magical orb, Mu had been itching for a fight. If Kang wasn't willing to face him, then who better to fight than this guy? The preemptive strike landed hard, right on top of Mu's head. Strangely though, the blow, which could have easily knocked someone unconscious or even killed them, left nothing more than a small scratch on Mu's head. That was all the confirmation Mu needed. With an excuse to start a fight now, he didn't waste any time. Mu retaliated immediately, delivering a powerful kick to the thief's stomach. The force of the blow caused the thief to lose control of Kang's weapon, unintentionally tossing it into the air. The weapon spun in the air for a moment before Mu caught it just as it was about to hit the ground. Without wasting a second, he swung it behind the beaten thief's neck and yanked the ugly man toward him in one swift motion. As soon as the thief was close enough, Mu struck him directly in the face with a brutal headbutt. Mu seemed to enjoy the sight, while the thief was on the verge of passing out from the pain. The man clutched his head with one hand, desperately trying to ease the pain, thinking Mu was done after that strike. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Mu wasn't about to let this guy off the hook without giving him a proper beating. Like a punching bag, the thief took hit after hit as Mu landed punches wherever and however he wanted. Sometimes he even used Kang's weapon to make the punishment feel more satisfying. The relentless blows continued until the thief could no longer handle it. He collapsed to the ground, shaking from the unbearable pain, tears streaming down his face as he cried like a helpless child. Mu stood over him, feeling satisfied that he had taught this guy a lesson, to never dare attack anyone else again. But that smug, satisfied smile on his face quickly faded. Mu realized he didn't enjoy one-sided, boring fights like this. It wasn't fun or even a little bit challenging for him. Mu thought back to how he felt when he first arrived on Earth and fought Lee's bully, or even that other guy, Hyung. He was far better and way more interesting than this one. Mu made up his mind. The only person worthy of being his opponent right now was Kang. No one else. Just then, he remembered that he had come here only to face Kang in the first place, not this ugly guy. He quickly turned to see where Kang was, but, to his surprise, Kang had completely disappeared. It seemed like Kang had taken the opportunity to make a run for it while Mu was busy with the thief to finish Kang's anti-bully job. As Kang hurried to get away quickly and quietly, he couldn't help but wonder how Mu kept finding and showing up wherever he went. Little did Kang know, that crazy-looking guy who seemed to enjoy fighting so much was actually a god. Even so, Kang was so caught up in trying to escape and get Mu's excited face out of his head that he didn't notice the dragonling. The little lizard looked completely distracted, obsessed with something on the other side of the street. As Kang rushed past, he accidentally kicked the dragonling right in the rear, sending the poor little thing flying forward. Kang was in such a hurry, though, that he didn't even stop to check what, or who, he had just kicked out of his way. A little while later, Kang arrived home. He stepped inside, casually kicked off his shoes, and sent them flying across the room without even bothering to use his hands. His mind was completely consumed with thoughts of Mu and that freaky face of his, always looking so pumped and ready to fight anyone. Just then, his sister, who had been outside, walked in. With a teasing tone, she shouted, "The prosecutor has arrived." Kang's 26-year-old sister, Hina, had decided to switch careers after that stalker case. She became a prosecutor with the goal of bringing justice to cruel criminals. Kang and Hina shared the same purpose, but it seemed they had chosen very different paths to achieve it. With a playful shove, Hina pushed past Kang, grinning as she mocked him again, saying, "How dare you block the path of a great prosecutor?" Kang, clearly annoyed, like any other brother would be, warned her about the consequences of making him use his powers. With that, everything settled down. Hina headed to her room to change her clothes, but not before calling out to Kang, asking him to make ramen for both of them since there was nothing else to eat. As Kang stood there, he couldn't help but think about that wild day when his sister got injured. The way Hina was acting now, so lively and full of energy, made Kang wonder if she had truly moved on from that incident or if she was just pretending. It was something he couldn't figure out. For Kang himself, forgetting that day wasn't an option. The next day, while everyone else was peacefully heading to school, Mu was doing the same. But instead of carrying a backpack or even a single book, he was only carrying Kang's weapon. And of course, the dragonling perched on his shoulder. The poor dragonling looked beaten and exhausted, muttering apologies for his failure last night. But, as usual, Mu didn't care about what the little creature was saying. Some of the students walking nearby, including Lee's bully, couldn't help but stare the little dragonling, wondering if the thing on Mu's shoulder was a Komodo dragon. But none of them dared to get close enough to find out. That's when something caught Mu's attention. It was, of course, Kim Yujin, the class president. As soon as she spotted her little lovely lizard, her face lit up with excitement. She started jumping up and down, clearly thrilled to see her talking friend again. But her happiness didn't last long. Mu quickly reminded her that it was time for her to help him with the favor he'd asked for. That's when Kim remembered the deal she had made when she agreed to borrow the talking lizard the other day. Mu himself didn't have much information to go on. He only knew that the person he was looking for wore some kind of mask and protective glasses. But that was enough for Kim to instantly realize who he was talking about. She told Mu she had heard stories about the guy, someone who acted like a bully hunter, stating he was famous for immediately pummeling anyone who behaved like a bully. Unfortunately, Kim didn't seem to have any detailed information about Kang beyond those common rumors, which left Mu feeling a bit disappointed. Still, he was confident they'd cross paths again soon, and next time, he swore he wouldn't let Kang escape so easily. What Mu didn't realize, though, was that Kang, the very person he was thinking about, was already there, secretly approaching and observing him from behind. Kang didn't stop there. Instead, he came even closer, and to Mu's and even the dragonling's horror, he leaned in and whispered, "Stay in your seat after class. I'll come find you." With that, Kang withdrawn his weapon, casually walked past Mu and continued on his way. Mu, on the other hand, hadn't expected to face Kang so soon. It was so sudden that just hearing Kang's voice sent shivers down his spine. Still, after all those planning to kill him in the first sight, Mu let Kang go away without any complaining. Watching how Kang and Lee behaved, Kim couldn't help but wonder if they were friends or if there was something between them that she didn't know about. Without knowing who really Kang was, she gathered her courage and asked Lee, "Who's that guy anyway?" Meanwhile, as Mu stood there, looking forward for his encounter with Kang after the day's class while watching how he is getting away, with just one word, replied to Kim Yujin, "Bully hunter." From that moment until the end of class, Mu's hopeful and excited expression didn't fade. The idea of finally facing someone worthy of spending his time made Mu feel both nervous and excited. To calm himself, Mu kept repeating to himself that he could wait as long as it took if it meant having a real fight. But it was all just an act, his eager face masking the chaotic thoughts in his mind. In reality, he was on edge, nervous to the point where his right leg wouldn't stop shaking. It was a clear sign that, despite his outward confidence, he was struggling to keep control. At the same time, the situation couldn't have been worse for the dragonling, who had chosen that very leg to hide under Mu's pant leg and rest during his classes. But now, he'd been dealing with what felt like an endless earthquake since the morning. That long school day, for both the dragonling and his master, finally came to an end. The students, except for the night study group, were free to leave. Without wasting a moment, Mu quickly found the class president girl and handed over his little assistant, who was clearly feeling nauseous, telling her he had something urgent to take care of. Without hesitation, Kim Yujin gladly accepted, almost as if it was the best thing that could have happened to her. She picked up the little lizard in her arms and started walking toward the exit, blissfully unaware that if she squeezed the dragonling just a bit too hard, she'd have to deal with him throwing up right then and there. Without asking any questions or doing anything else, she happily left the classroom. And as soon as she was gone, leaving only Lee Ho behind, a hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the room. Of course it was Kang, who jumped out and made his presence known. The long-awaited moment had finally arrived for Mu, and he realized the time for the fight had come. Kang didn't waste any time. He stepped into the classroom, shut the door behind him, and reached into the depths of his backpack. With a calm but deliberate motion, he pulled out his training gloves and slipped them on. Mu was a little surprised, wondering if Kang was planning to do the same thing he had done before, when he used his belt to wrap around his hand for protection and better performance. As Kang slipped on his second glove, he looked at Mu with a curious expression and asked if he actually loved fighting. Mu's response wasn't what Kang expected. Mu shook his head and outright rejected the idea, saying he didn't fight because he loved it. Before they could continue talking, what Mu truly loved flashed through his mind. First and foremost, it was the pain and shock he felt when he got hit. For most people, it would be the last thing they'd want to experience. But for Mu, enduring that kind of pain after thousands of years made those moments oddly satisfying. Second was the burning sensation in his muscles, screaming at him after being pushed beyond their limits during a movement. And third, because for over 3 million years, fighting and battling had been the only thing that made him feel truly alive. With that mindset, Mu believed he didn't fight because he liked it. He fought because it was a necessity for him, a part of his existence. Yet, as he thought about it, his face twisted into a creepy, overly excited expression that made Kang pause. In that moment, Kang couldn't help but think, this guy is completely insane, maybe a psycho, or something even worse. Kang didn't bother overthinking Mu's strange behavior. Instead, he unzipped his backpack again, pulled out another pair of training gloves, and tossed them to him. He acted like he was there for a friendly sparring match, not a fight to the death. Mu let the gloves hit him square in the face on purpose, not even blinking from the impact, but still managed to catch them mid-air before they fell. Kang calmly placed his backpack in the corner and, with a serious expression, told Mu to put the gloves on. He explained that he wanted to keep things fair, mentioning that he couldn't even take a fight seriously unless his opponent looked like more than just some random thug. In an instant, Mu slipped on the gloves and dashed toward Kang, clearly excited to put his new gift to good use. He threw the first punch, and as expected, Kang blocked and dodged it at the same time. Kang looked slightly annoyed by how hasty Mu was, not even giving him a chance to say what he wanted to say. But he quickly calmed himself down, reminding himself that he came here for a fight, and this was the fight. No point in getting upset. After exchanging a series of random punches and blocks, both of them stepped back for a brief moment. That short pause was all Kang needed to assess the situation and refocus. Drawing on his experience as a pro boxer, he reminded himself that the first thing he needed to do was relax his body and avoid letting his muscles stiffen up. This wasn't just about brute strength, it was about control. Kang took his first step, and that was all the opening Mu needed to charge in again, recklessly going for another attack. But unlike last time, Kang was more than ready. Not only did he defend himself without taking any damage, but he also turned the tables and landed a heavy punch right on Mu's jaw. If that wasn't enough, he used the new opening to follow up with another strike, this time hitting Mu on the opposite side of his face, and even harder than the first punch. As Kang looked at his hand, he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The power and precision behind his punches left him amazed at his own performance. He was so impressed with himself that he began reviewing, or maybe even replaying the motion on Mu, almost as if testing it out again to see how it worked. First, he loosened up his muscles, then let the rotational force of his body flow through his fist and fingers, transmitting all that power straight into his opponent's body. Now, it was Kang who looked genuinely excited, eager to teach Mu some painful yet practical boxing lessons. Meanwhile, Mu couldn't deny he was impressed by Kang's skill. He realized that if it weren't for the body enhancements he'd received from that mysterious orb, those punches could have done some serious damage. But instead of being discouraged, Mu felt even more exhilarated. This was exactly what he'd been craving, a fight that was both challenging and painful. With that thought driving him, he couldn't help but press on, determined to continue what he believed was a proper fight. On the third floor, a red-haired guy was dozing off during the night self-study class. Out of nowhere, his body started trembling uncontrollably, like he was having a nightmare about seeing a ghost. He jolted awake, looking completely disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was. Once he snapped back to reality, he noticed a not-so-friendly note on his desk. The message called him out for always sleeping during class. Without bothering to figure out who left the note, he glanced at the clock on his phone and decided it was time to leave. He grabbed his backpack, stood up from his seat, and, a few moments later, found himself on the stairs, heading down to exit the school. Feeling a bit hungry, the scruffy-looking guy pulled out a snack from seemingly nowhere and started eating it. As he reached the second floor, something weird caught his attention. A shadow moving up and down in the second year's class at this hour. It was clearly someone, or maybe two people, but he couldn't tell who or they. That shadow, of course, belonged to Mu and Kang, who were still locked in their fierce fight. At that moment, Mu found himself cornered, with no way to do anything but defend himself. Thinking fast, he came up with an idea. He lifted his foot into the air and, in a sudden and unexpected move, planted it firmly on Kang's chest, stopping and surprising him. But that wasn't all. As Kang staggered slightly, caught off guard, Mu aimed to follow up with a kick to his face. Kang managed to protect his face, but it was clear he was furious. He glared at Mu and demanded to know why he suddenly started using his legs when kicks are forbidden in boxing. Mu, now confident with his newfound strategy, was ready to attack again. With a smirk, he replied, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what boxing is." Before Kang could respond, Mu leapt toward him, aiming another kick while taunting, "Who said we're only using fists in this fight, huh?" His kick landed hard, strong enough to push Kang backward. For a few moments, Kang was visibly struggling. A part of him even started to believe Mu's words. But as a trained boxer, he was completely unprepared to deal with kicks. Before Kang could regain his focus, Mu took advantage of his confusion and landed another solid kick. The once dominant boxer now found himself in a bad spot, cornered and unable to do anything but defend himself. Kang couldn't help but wonder how someone who looked so weak could deliver such powerful kicks to his upper body. To Kang's shock, Mu suddenly switched tactics and aimed a kick at a vital point in his lower body. Kang froze, completely unsure of how to respond. One thing was certain: if that spot got hit, it would be over for him. He would collapse and be unable to continue the fight. Just as he feared, Mu struck the weak spot effortlessly. But to both surprise, nothing happened. He didn't even feel a hint of pain. Mu immediately retreated, putting distance between them. Yet he was smiling, a smug, knowing smile, as if he'd held back on purpose and deliberately avoided finishing Kang off. In truth, Mu had used his full strength in that attack, but the physical enhancement of the Dragonling's power had worn off, as though it had never existed. Realizing this, Mu started to panic. He knew that without the enhancement, he was no match for Kang. Meanwhile, Kang, still a little surprised, noticed something was off. He knew Mu wasn't that kind of person to show mercy to anyone, but still had no idea why he hadn't gone for the finishing blow. But then, as if divine insight struck him, Kang smirked and said mockingly, "Don't tell me, you suddenly lost your power." Kang had no clue that his random, ridiculous guess about Mu was actually spot on. To him, the only thing that made sense was that Mu was just exhausted and worn out. He had no idea about the orb or the Dragonling buff. Mu, on the other hand, didn't say a word and just kept pretending everything was fine, like Kang was completely off base. But that didn't change Kang's mind. He'd already pieced together the situation in his head, and it was enough to make him burst out laughing after their intense fight. Mu looked like he had no idea how to keep going in this mess of a battle. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy standing behind the classroom door was watching them. The sight of two awkward-looking people trying to fight each other while laughing like it was some comedy show wasn't exactly entertaining for him. In fact, it was so annoying that he decided to just leave instead of wasting any more time on their silly fight. It wasn't clear if this scruffy-looking guy was strong or skilled, but for some reason, watching Kang and Mu's battle left him feeling grossed out. Just as the red-haired guy walked off, Kang finally stopped laughing. His face turned serious as he charged at Mu, knowing this was the perfect moment to take advantage of the situation. Mu, on the other hand, found himself in a pretty bad spot, trying to use his leg to block Kang's attack or at least make it harder for him to land a punch. But that simple plan wasn't enough to stop Kang. Instead of aiming for Mu's face, Kang went straight for a vital spot, one that Mu had unknowingly left wide open. Mu thought his knee would work as a solid defense, but things didn't go the way he expected. With just one strike, not only did he feel the sharp pain, but being on one leg caused him to spin around almost 90 degrees, leaving a perfect opening for Kang. Kang didn't waste any time. He landed a bone-crushing punch right to Mu's head. The hit was so strong it sent Mu flying several meters backward, but even that wasn't enough to knock him out. Mu slumped against the wall behind him, realizing that without the enhancement buff, there was no way he could stand up to Kang's solid, muscular body. One desperate solution crossed his mind. If he could just use a small amount of his original mana or inner energy, he could easily overpower this gorilla. But since he'd already tried and failed to use his mana several times, that idea didn't seem very reliable right now. Still, Mu decided to take a chance, because even the smallest shot at doing the impossible was better than nothing. He pushed himself up to his feet, gathered his courage, and focused as hard as he could to summon even a tiny bit of magic into his fist before attacking. Putting all his trust in that slim hope, he confidently launched himself at Kang, now relying on his non-existent magic. But Kang, like it was nothing more than a kid's punch, easily caught Mu's fist midair before it could even land. Seeing the opportunity to mock Mu again, Kang teased him with a smug grin, which now looked more lively, but still lacked any real excitement or effort. Then, out of nowhere, Kang suddenly felt something strange, like energy or a weird sensation passing through his body. It caught him so off guard that he instinctively turned his head to look behind him, trying to figure out what it was. That momentary distraction was all Mu needed. He didn't hesitate for a second and took full advantage of Kang's lowered guard, throwing another punch straight at his face. This time Mu's punch wasn't as strong as it would have been with the enhancement buff, but for some reason it hit Kang harder than expected. Hard enough to make him feel a little dizzy, but also enough to snap him back to reality and refocus all his attention on his opponent. Kang managed to grab Mu's other hand after that punch, but once again, he felt a stronger wave of energy passing through his body and moving toward his back. Instinctively, he turned to see what it was that just passed through him. Whether it was magic from Mu or just some strange sensation didn't really matter. What did matter was that Mu used this moment to take advantage once again. This time, he relied on the most dependable weapon in his arsenal, his head. Mu's headbutt struck hard, sending Kang stumbling backward. He hit the classroom door with a loud crash and collapsed, completely knocked out. Mu stood tall and proud in front of him, wondering if his plan to use mana in his attacks had actually worked or if it was all just his imagination. After a moment, he realized that he'd somehow managed to channel a small amount of magic into his fist by redirecting a little bit of mana into his body, using a new method he'd never tried before. But honestly, the thrill of being able to use magic wasn't nearly as exciting as the thought of what he wanted to do to Kang now. Looking like a caveman who hadn't eaten in a year and just found a feast, Mu approached Kang's unconscious face. But he wasn't planning anything too crazy. He was just eager to leave his mark on him, in his own way. At the very last moment, fate somehow managed to wake Kang up, letting him save his ear for another day. As soon as he came to his senses, he realized Mu was about to mark him as neutered, just like Mu's other unfortunate victims. But that wasn't something Kang, a champion boxer, was going to let happen so easily. He quickly shoved Mu away and got to his feet, still feeling dizzy but determined to stop him. Kang immediately admitted that he had underestimated Mu and accepted his loss, but that didn't mean he would let Mu rip his ear off. He wanted to say something, probably about the strange sensation he'd felt earlier before getting knocked out, but the pounding pain in his nose and his spinning head weren't letting him form a single coherent thought. So instead of explaining, he made a quick excuse and decided to leave for now, thinking it was best to get as far away from Mu as possible, as quickly as possible. Watching Kang walk away, Mu couldn't help but feel disappointed. He'd been really looking forward to adding Kang to his list of playthings, but it clearly wasn't going to happen today. A while later, at Kim Yujin's house, the little dragonling was struggling under the weight of a bag that looked to be twice his size. It was so heavy that he was already sweating before he'd even started moving. Apparently, the bag was full of stuff that either he or his master had asked Kim to buy for them. With no better option, the dragonling braced himself and headed back, choosing the hard way, leaping down from rooftops instead of sticking to the normal, safer paths. As he started running toward Lee's house, the little dragonling suddenly spotted Kang in the distance, looking dizzy and holding his injured face. The moment he saw him, the dragonling immediately recognized him. It was the same guy who had kicked him in the butt the other day for absolutely no reason. There was no way he was letting this chance for revenge slip away. He quickly dropped his bag on the ground and crouched into a ready-to-jump stance on top of it. Then, like a bullet, he launched himself toward Kang, aiming to headbutt him square in the face, just like his master had done earlier. But luck wasn't on his side. Kang, despite his dizzy state, spotted the dragonling at the last second and instinctively threw a punch, smacking the poor lizard midair. For a moment, Kang was freaked out. Dazed and confused, he didn't even recognize the dragonling and was left wondering what kind of weird animal had just attacked him. He was so out of it, he couldn't even process what was happening. Kang thought about giving the dragonling a proper beating for scaring the hell out of him, but in his current condition, that just wasn't an option. Instead, he shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and continued on his way, desperate to get home and rest. As soon as Kang disappeared, someone else arrived at the scene, standing over the dragonling's crumpled body, and of course, it was none other than Mu. He stared down at the dragonling, beaten and sprawled out on the ground, wondering if the little guy was dead or still alive, and, more importantly, what was inside that bag lying next to him. The next morning, Mu was walking through the streets on his way to school again, but this time with one noticeable difference. He was wearing a brand new school uniform and carrying a dragonling on his new backpack. The dragonling seemed perfectly content being carried like this. It was definitely more comfortable and secure than sitting on Mu's shoulder or hiding under his clothes. Just then, Dragonling proudly mentioned that Kim Yoo-jin, his royal and ever-reliable assistant, was the one who bought the uniform and backpack for Mu, only to satisfy him. Dragonling seemed to like his new home and declared he wouldn't come out from there, wanting to stay hidden and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention for the time being. Meanwhile, Kang was walking down the other side of the street when he spotted Mu. Without hesitation, he crossed over to greet him and, with a curious look, asked why Mu was wearing a school uniform on a Saturday. To Kang's surprise, Mu simply replied, "What's Saturday?" Kang felt a little disappointed, or maybe even annoyed, thinking Mu was trying to mess with him so early in the morning. He decided not to argue about it, though, and instead attempted to bring up what he wanted to tell Mu the day before, but hadn't been able to. Kang asked Mu again if he actually liked fighting, and once more, Mu gave the same answer, saying he fights because he has to. It was hard for Kang to believe that, especially after seeing the excitement on Mu's face during his battle yesterday. However, Kang didn't complain about it and instead got straight to the point. He requested Mu to hang out with him from now on, adding that if Mu agreed, he wouldn't feel bored anymore because he wouldn't have to keep looking for fights. As soon as Mu heard that, his whole body started trembling like crazy, and that scary yet excited smile lit up his face again. Kang didn't need any words to understand Mu's answer. It was written all over him. It wasn't easy for anyone to change Mu's opinion about someone, but somehow, Kang had managed to do it. Suddenly, Mu felt like Kang might actually be a good person. Everything seemed to be going well for both of them until Mu suddenly blurted out, "Take me somewhere I can fight right now." Kang froze for a second before explaining that he didn't mean they were going to fight immediately. He was talking about some other time. Meanwhile, the Dragonling was secretly watching their conversation from the safety of the bag, either trying to stay hidden or plotting how to get his revenge for losing to Kang twice before.